So this is where we more or less left things last time. Going to look in this video a little bit more at SVG, just because it's an interesting thing to explore and to be aware of as a designer, that there are possibilities beyond simply placing an SVG as an image. This is what we did in the last video. We placed this image, SVG image up here, and we placed this rather simpler one that I hand coded. In fact, placed those using the image element, the image tag. So that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You have all the benefits when you place an image using the image tag. Working with vectors, it's resolution independent. Unlike when we place a photo, we don't need to worry about the resolution, it's the image's dimensions in pixels and so on. All we need to worry about is, say, the color, whether the scale is appropriate for our design, things like that. But SVG has a whole lot of capabilities beyond simply functioning as an image format. And we looked last time at the code that makes up SVG. We looked at that just in general terms, and we saw that indeed there's a lot that's familiar there from our exploration of HTML and CSS. SVG code is not written in HTML, but it is written in a related markup language called XML, Extensible Markup Language. And indeed, it is styled, or can be styled, with CSS, just like our web pages. So it's got a lot in common. It's not exactly the same thing, but it has a lot in common with the way that we've been building web pages. So that means that it's relatively straightforward to leverage a lot of our knowledge that we've gained through working with HTML and CSS to working with SVG in more interesting ways. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code here, and I've got here indeed I've got my two image elements here, just placed exactly like in the other image, using the source attribute and the width attribute. I've just sized this to 100%, and of course, very importantly, I've put in an alt attribute as well, alt text, describing that image, what it looks like. Okay, so that accessibility point, that is something that we want to be careful not to lose track of as we go about doing what we're going to do now, which is to embed the SVG directly into our HTML. All right, let's have a look at that. So I'm going to open up this SVG file, the second one that I placed here, the one that I hand coded, just because it's relatively simple. So it's simple shapes.svg, and we saw last time, how similar SVG tags or XML tags in SVG look to HTML tags, how similar they are. And indeed here we have CSS within these style tags. The style element, by the way, does also exist in HTML. It is possible to embed CSS directly into an HTML page using the style element. My preference is generally to keep the styles as we have been doing in a separate file. Okay. But it turns out that all of this that we have here, except for this first line, that XML line, all of that we can actually just copy and paste directly into our HTML, because there is in fact such a thing as an SVG tag in HTML. So I'm just going to copy that and come back to index.html. I'm going to actually delete this image element here. Let's paste in that code from the SVG. All right, document. So there we have it. All right. And as we saw in the last video, the rectangle and the circle are just made with these two tags here, this one and this one, rect and circle. All right. And the position is given by these x and y coordinates. Those values, just as in HTML, are given in pixels. That by default they're pixels. And we've got this point here, this attribute, adding a CSS class to it. Note one thing here. We've got, because these are self-closing tags, all right, we've got that / and a right angle bracket. Now, in HTML, when you have a self-closing element, such as this one, the image element, you can, if you wish, complete that tag with a / and a right angle bracket. Okay, it does work without it. My preference is to do that. Now, in SVG, I should emphasize that is not optional. If you have a self-closing element, a single tag, you must close it with a / and a right angle bracket. But that's SVG only, where that is actually enforced. Or rather, it is XML, which is strictly speaking, the language that SVG uses. Scalable vector graphics is written in XML. Okay. Now I'm going to for the minute I'm going to leave these tags exactly as they are. But what I will do is take these CSS classes. I'm going to cut them out of the SVG element. I'm going to cut them, and I'm going to paste them into my general CSS file. So it's loaded with everything else. All right. Just has that advantage of centralizing everything. And if you're building out a website, sometimes this is a great way to work, because it means that you can centralize things like your color definitions, so that you can change your colors globally across a whole website. This can be important for branding, for other design reasons. Okay. Okay, so without those styles, though, these shapes will just appear in black. So I need to be careful, because they just default to a black fill. So I need to be careful to come back into styles.css and paste those in before I go any further. Okay, so I've got my different sections here that are defined by different comments. I've got responsive media queries down here, layout related stuff up here. Okay, so in here I'm going to make a new little section. I'm just going to put in a little CSS comment, and I produce that by hitting Command /. I'm just going to write SVG classes, and then I'm going to paste Command V, paste in those two classes here. All right. So that means that when I come back to my web page here, it should look pretty similar. All right. So the size is maybe going to change a little bit because it's defined by the SVG tag rather than the image tag. But let's have a look at that. All right. Indeed, there we go. All right, so that's pretty good. But it means that we can come back again to styles.css. If I want to change the color of that square, I can just do it here. I can go for maybe I want to go for a paler red or something of that sort. Okay. Let's leave it with a little bit of transparency. Okay, so let's come back here and we should see different red there. But there's a lot more that I can do here. Because the appearance of these SVG objects is now being controlled by my CSS, it means that I can actually take advantage of some of the interactive features of CSS. So I can do things such as this. I can put in my square property, I can put in transition property. Now we haven't seen this one yet. What it does is give a timing on color transitions. Okay. So far we won't see much of a change there, but though we might actually, just as the CSS is loaded, we might see a slight transition. Nope, that seems pretty good. All right, so just as with our links, you might remember for our navigation section on our navlink class, we put in, let's just find that, put in this thing here. We've got the basic navlink definition, then we've got this line here, navlink : hover. So this is called a pseudo class. And what it does generally is to apply certain behaviors under certain conditions. In this case, it's when the user is using a device with a pointer, such as a desktop operating system, macOS, Windows, and so on, and they pass that cursor over that navigation link. All right. So we're going to do something similar down here with this square one class. So I'm just going to copy the class name there, again bringing the full stop with it, squiggly brackets, the braces, and I'm going to put that pseudo class on here. What I want is this one, square one, hover. Okay. All right. So what do I want to do? I think what I want to do is to change the fill color. Let's change it to more of a magenta. That's fun. Let's do something like that. Still leave it with a little bit of transparency. So it's RGBA. So that's meant to be RGBA as well. Remembering to finish that line with a semicolon. As you may have seen, so often when you hit problems when building a website, it's because you forget some tiny little thing like closing a bracket, putting a closing tag in, things like that. If you forget those little things, your website can go awry. Okay, so we're just changing that fill color there. I'll actually just make it slightly more of a purple, just so that change is more visible. Okay, so what this means is that when I hover over that shape in the SVG, there'll be a 2-second transition, and it'll change color there. All right, so let's have a look at that. So I just hit Command R to reload. Oh, and there we go. There's our color transition. All right, so far so good. Let's also change the stroke color. I'm going to copy and paste that value in here because I want to edit it. Might change that one to more of an orange. It's not a very nice color combination. Maybe I'll change that to something else. I'll change that one to more of a red. Okay, so we should see our stroke change color as well there. There we go. Still not loving those colors, but that's by the by. All right, there's more that we can do. Let's make it also rotate. So we can use this property, the transform property. There are all sorts of pretty interesting values that we can assign. One of them, the one that we want right now, is rotate. And I'm going to say rotate 30 deg. That's how you specify an angle in degrees in CSS. All right, let's go back and have a look at that. Again, Command R to reload. There we go. So we have a color change plus the shape rotates. All right, so that's very, very basic kind of interactivity, but it's something. So there are all sorts of potential uses for this UI and UX kind of applications. So my feeling is that these sort of features of SVG are really, really underutilized by designers. I think the possibilities for making rich interactive illustrations, really have enormous potential. Okay, so this is absolutely not a requirement for the assessment project, but it is an interesting and fun thing to explore. And I think it's a great thing to be aware of. So you can make an illustration in Illustrator, and you can add sort of some interactive features to it through CSS.